Not yet. More comfortable. No.
Oh, thank you.
Testing, testing.
Thanks. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Is there a heckling section?
Yeah, I think in the cry room. How I put these things on? Oh, yeah, there we go. How Moses wasn't. I was going to kind of kick it off and then pass it off to you, but about how Moses isn't. How we would say he's damaged goods, about him being a murderer. So I'm kind of modeling our conversation from yesterday, and so we'll kind of guide or just follow it. I've got all the points we talked about. I've got my notes outlined. I know the different parts. I'll jump in and say something. So we'll just let it flow like a conversation. Wherever we go is where we go, and if we hit a dead spot, I'll just reference something, you know. And
Based on what we talked about,
no, we're doing Moses, but we'll talk a little bit about Jethro. Some, yeah, yeah, Moshi. That's true. Let's see. I don't know if this is. Jason, you're smart with stuff like this. I don't know if this is on. The screen's on. It says it's picking it up.
is the mute button on the top?
Okay, it's not muted either. Maybe it just hasn't.
You turned up there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, if you get signal, they may not have turned up.
Okay. I think so.
I flip mine.
Oh, here he is. Yeah.
Am I live there, Chief? This one. I'm live?
Sounds all pretty good.
Gentleman, scholar.
Is it loud? Hello?
Hello. Interesting. This should be enough.
Yeah.
That's good. It's live. Interesting. Did they get changed? Were they changed?
Oh, sorry. I just saw your text. My bad.
You good? I can go up there.
Yeah, part of it's for the folks online that be watching. Yeah, so they can have some audio. But otherwise, we'll just talk loud.
Got my count, man.
I don't think so.
I'm like a car, just squeak the wheels.
It's the worst part, ain't it?
Waiting on your mic.
Yeah.
It's a coming.
Why would you do that?
It's good. It's hot.
Yeah, sure. No, him. No, it's,
It's got to be right up from the
I would prefer if you went Okay, so I'm all good. All right. Oh, thanks. It's like parting my hair.
Yeah, let me fix that for you. There you go.
I wouldn't know. All right.
Okay.
Well, so I guess if we're both live, you good?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
I can hear you.
Can you hear that?
I don't think they can hear me, but Adrian says he's got it. It is?
It's coming through?
Okay.
Sound okay? Sound okay? No.
All right, everybody. If y'all can stop being such good Christians and cut all that fellowship out, we'll get the Bible class started. Hey, I see y'all back there. Quit being so happy. No, let's get...
You think this is a church?
Yeah. What are we, Christians? No, this is great. We're glad to have y'all. Honestly, this is the class that I'm the most nervous for, and I'll explain to all of you why. So in preparation, one of the things that I've started to do is I would prepare the entire manuscript lesson. I would compile all of the questions for the other person. I would even give them answers in case they had a brain freeze and they didn't know what to answer, and I would give them their answers. I created a PowerPoint, and then I also created a 2-page worksheet outline for the entire audience to know, and I emailed it to Johnny, and I didn't hear anything from him. And he goes, "Hey man, let's get together tomorrow and talk." And I was like, "That sounds good. When works for you?" And he's like, "Well, I gotta go to drop some dogs off at the vet. And he goes, "After I finish up with that, I'll come over." I was like, "All right, sounds good." And I printed out both of our lessons, and I even used the ones where it had his name on it that was highlighted so he'd know where his questions were. And I handed it to him, and he sits down and gets all comfortable in the office there, and he goes, "Well, Rod, this ain't gonna work." He goes, "This is too complicated. I don't even know where we'd start. It's got too much going on. So let's just talk about it."
When you gave me that copy, and there was some words on there I had to go look up, I thought, no, you forgot this. You're dealing with this isn't done in Devant. This is the parking lot, Elder. I wanted to drop my tailgate out there. Let's go outside and do this deal.
So
you got the wrong elder up here for that.
And so we sit down for an hour, and we talk, and we have discussion. I'm taking notes the whole time, and he got pieces of paper, and as we're talking, I just hear a rip, and he just sticks it in his Bible. And we talk a little bit more, and I hear another rip, and he just sticks it in his Bible. And then we're done talking, and I'm like, I got everything wrote out. And he just says, "We're going to wing it."
Well, when Rod first asked me to do this, I went right into the Moses mode. I give him 5 excuses right quick when I'm not your guy. I said, no.
Oh, man. Yeah, that was hilarious. What were those 5 reasons that Moses gave? Let's see. I had them written out here, actually.
Yeah, well, that was on your other part.
Yeah. Yeah, he said, "Who am I? Who are you? They won't believe me. I'm not good with words. And please send someone else."
That's right. Them last 2 especially.
Yeah. So anyway, where I wanted us to go ahead and get started at is to really talk about Moses didn't discriminate. We see that Moses was a man of zeal from the get-go. He sees where an Israelite man was being oppressed, more so than what he already was as a slave, but he was being mistreated to a harsher degree. And he sees this Egyptian man treating his brother wrong. He didn't allow that zeal to go into check. He murdered a man, and he killed him. We also notice where the next day he sees these 2 Jewish men who are arguing and fighting with each other, and he says, "Well, what's wrong with you? Like, we can reconcile this. Come together." And they said, "Well, what are you going to do, murder us like the guy you did before?" And then he feared for his life and ran. And then the first thing he notices when he gets to Midian is these Midianite male shepherds harassing Jethro's daughters who are trying to water their sheep. And so we notice initially in the first 3 interactions of Moses' life as an adult that one, he has this almost unquenchable thirst for righteousness.
he wants to see the right thing be done, and if he's going to do it, he's going to make sure that it is done. We also notice that he doesn't discriminate, whether it's a Gentile versus a Jew, whether it's a Jew versus a Jew, or whether it's a Gentile versus a Gentile. He doesn't care. He just cares about justice. But at this point in his life, Johnny, how would we look at Moses?
How would we look at him?
Yeah, I mean, it's like he murdered a man.
Well, yeah, you would look at him as damaged goods. I mean, we would, as a society, you would think, okay, this guy's a murderer. I mean, really? God's going to let him use him in this capacity to lead the Israelites? And that's one thing we talked about, that there's nobody in here, under the sound of our voice, that doesn't have a past, doesn't have something that they regretted or would like to change. And you may think, oh, I'm damaged goods. How in the world could God use me? Right. Well, I noticed when Moses and God had that first interaction at the burning bush, God didn't bring that up. That, well, we got to take care of this murder in the past. The scripture doesn't tell us if that was resolved prior to, but God knew his heart and knew that he could use him in the kingdom, exactly. or for what his purpose was right there. So.
Right. And it's like what we had talked about afterwards. I think we were riding in the truck and you said, Moses, it was actually at the very end, right before we left, but you said Moses was a completely different man at the end of that 40 years.
Well, we talked about that Moses, he was 40 when he fled. And at that point in time, you got to figure that Moses was not ready. It took 40 more years. Moses was 80 when he approached God, or God approached him about leading the Israelites. Mm-hmm. Well, you think about it, God is going to call him to lead a nation of people. Well, these were families. These were all different walks of life. Well, he didn't even have a wife at the time. He didn't have any children at the time. And that was going to be a big part of what he was going to be doing. And he wasn't a shepherd. He wasn't familiar with being in the desert, as far as we know. Right. I mean, he'd been, he'd raised up under
Pharaoh's household.
Yeah, Pharaoh's household. So what would he know about life in the desert? Well, for 40 years, he learned it. Exactly. And he was ready. At that point in time, of course, God's timing is perfect. So at that point in time, God said, all right, we're going to go.
God sent him the exact trials that he needed in his life to prepare him to become the man of God that he needed to be.
I think so, absolutely.
Like you quoted when we were spending time together about 1 Samuel with David, about the uncircumcised Philistines. If God's going to hand the life of the bear and the lion over to me, yep, then who is this uncircumcised Philistine to stand against me?
That's
and
right.
We'll talk about that some later with the faith that the Israelites should have had in the point of the Exodus. The thing that we had talked about is a lot of us will allow our sin to stop us from serving God. I have friends who that live in other states, but they allowed a secret sin in their life to prevent them from leading singing, to stop them from teaching a Bible class, to stop them from mustering up the courage to even reach out to somebody else about the gospel. And because of that, they allowed their sin to inhibit them. Falling short of the gloriousness of God by sinning isn't the greatest mistake. Allowing any doubt or fear that sin may have in our lives to stop us from serving God is the greatest mistake. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we talked about with Moses, we see a little bit of insecurity, maybe a lot of it, I guess, initially, but who isn't in some points in time? But what we look at is he does a great job at not being prideful. And I like to think of it as a twofold mirror. One side of the mirror is pride. I'm the greatest thing. I have this delusion of grandeur that I'm just the greatest thing that God has ever gifted to the earth. Don't you love being around people like that? No, you can't stand it. I mean, but it's like you have all of this pride and you're so full of yourself. But the other side of that mirror, the same mirror of pride, is that self-deprecation. I hate myself. I can't even look at myself in the mirror. I disgust me. But Moses could have looked at himself in the mirror and said, I murdered a man. I can see his face. I remember what I did. And he could hold that against himself and never allow himself to step up into the seat that God has called and invited him and asked him to do.
Yep.
But he didn't. He was able to grow past that. And like you said, we've all made huge mistakes in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, none of us can cast that first stone because all of us have sinned. All of us have messed up. And that's where God's glory and mercy comes in. And so, nothing disqualifies anybody from being a servant in the kingdom.
Right.
The only thing that can disqualify you is yourself by turning away, deciding not to. One of the things we talked about was, well, how stubborn the people were.
Oh, my. You know, we talk about Job being a patient man, and rightfully so. But when you read through what Moses dealt with the people, son of a gun, he had to have a lot of patience, because those people, they still had the lights of Egypt in the rearview mirror whenever they started complaining. It was amazing. They got to the Red Sea, and you know, all of a sudden they're upset because they didn't see any way out. Of course, they wouldn't trust in God at that point to get them through, although they had been witness to everything he had done in Egypt. But still, they immediately started complaining that, well, you brought us all the way out here to die. And then it just was almost a regular pattern as time went on. It's amazing to read that. But yes, Moses had to be awful patient, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, it's even the fact that he interceded for the people on multiple occasions. You know, not just once, but we were going into detail about Moses interceding before the people twice. We'll go to the incident of the golden calf. So you can either turn to Deuteronomy, I believe it's chapter 8, or you can go to Exodus chapter 32. For the sake of this, I'll be in Exodus chapter 32. And so what we look at, we'll just go through and read this and pick out the pieces. Initially, to summarize verses 1 through 6, we talked about what Aaron did. We covered that last week. The people said, make us a golden calf, and he did. They pulled out all of the jewelry that the Egyptians had so gladly given them, because they said, please leave, get out of here. We'll pay you to get out of here, just leave. And they used all of that material, or most of it, to build this golden calf. And then Aaron presented it and said, this is your God. We're in Exodus 32. Pick it up in verse 7. And the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. Food for thought. Was God actually changing his mind, or was God trying to get Moses to see something? I don't know. Well, let's keep reading. But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent, he did bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised, I will give it to your offspring, and they will inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that had been spoken of bringing on his people. If I can be completely honest with you guys, and y'all don't run me out of here, if I was Moses, I'd have said, well, you are the Lord. Well, you are God. You make the right decision every time. So if that's what you want to do, then by all means, I trust you. I mean, to think about, no much sooner than he had delivered them through God. I mean, they had seen all of these miracles, and they immediately turn around. And then we see right after this, if you keep reading, Moses' anger burns hot. He casts all of their gold in the water, and he says, drink it. I mean,
After he broke the 10 Commandments.
after he broke the
And I wondered if he threw them at Aaron. You don't know that, but he threw them and broke them.
Jason said earlier, he goes, Moses was the only person to break all 10 commandments at once.
Go back and give the benefit of the doubt. Because killed a bunch of them.
3,000 of them. Yeah. 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 Well, I did a little bit of research on that because Moses prayed to God. I mean, he for the benefit of the people to say, think about this. Well, what I read something that said Moses' prayer was instrumental in getting God to change his course of action. And that makes more sense to me than changing God's mind. But changing his course of action. I like that phraseology on that. No, but you had 3,000 of them once they got down there, and they separated them. They did, but so.
So one of the things we can look at is either, since we're on this topic, we'll eventually come back to Numbers 13 and talk about spying out the promised land. In fact, let's actually just go ahead and go there. So turn to Numbers 13, if you will. There's a reason why they were in the wilderness in the first place. The initial reason is if they would have went immediately north after everything that happened in Egypt, who was waiting? The armies that were already there, the Canaanites, the Egyptian people they literally had just lived out the thing that they celebrate in Passover. And so to take them immediately north wasn't going to make sense. They would have been killed in battle. And so God took them through the desert, and he took them into the ocean. And as we know, Pharaoh's servants, or the entire army got swept away in the ocean. And then as they continue, they sent 10 spies for 40 days into the land of milk and honey, into the land that God had promised them that he was going to give them. Were these just any 10 guys? Who were they?
No, they were leaders. It says in chapter 13, verse 2, everyone a leader among them. So they weren't just they were handpicked as leaders.
Right. They played a significant role.
Absolutely.
Just as when one of the elders speak, we listen. In the same way that when a commander walks in the room and they speak, you listen. When the boss walks in and they speak, you listen. Well, in these ways, these men held a great accountability over the people under them. And so we see where they spent the 40 days, and they sojourned in the land. They went through, and they were spies in all essence, seeking out the capabilities. And then when we look at chapter 13, they went out to spy the land. Let's see where I put it. Well, I didn't put it there. There it is. Verse 28. They said, however, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Who is Anak? Well, depending on you can go ahead.
Giants.
The giants.
Yeah.
The descendants of the Nephilim. These basically Goliath's ancestors that he would have had there. So they say, well, there's these giant soldiers, these fortified cities. We don't even have weapons. Like, what are we going to do to take on these people? At least that's what 8 of the spies had. Mm-hmm. And then there's the 2 ones that had righteous hearts.
Verse 27, it says, we went to the land where you sent us, and it truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, in other words, and then here it comes. That's when they start giving a bad report. If you notice at the beginning of chapter 13 and verse 2, chapter 13, let's start with verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. So there's no question that God is going to give them this land. But he wants them to go. He wants to send spies, which they do. And then, of course, they come back. And think about this. The whole congregation, all the people there, heard the same thing. They all heard they heard Caleb and Joshua, and they heard the other 8 give a bad report. And they chose to believe the bad report. But God had promised them, and they're standing at the door. God had promised them they'd give them that land. But they just didn't. They seen the giants, and they were fearful. They didn't think they could do it. Well, and they couldn't alone.
Even in verse 33, it says they saw the Nephilim, and they were the sons of the Nephilim, and they said, we are like grasshoppers compared to them. And they said, we can't do it. And it was that the entire congregation heard this report. Everybody heard it together all at once. They heard the 2, and then they heard the other 8. But who did they decide to go with? Well, the book of Exodus might have been a lot shorter, depending on how this conversation went.
Well, when we were talking about this, I said that we flipped over to 1 Samuel 17.
Verse 37,
45,
and then 47.
Yeah, verse 37. If they had this same mindset, which they should have, that David had, and David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. But so God would have delivered them from those people. And then in verse 47, he says, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into his hands. Also, if you back up to verse 46, let's see here. No, I'm sorry. Back up to verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel. So, had they had that same mindset, they would have went into the land right then. They wouldn't have been condemned to roam for 40 more years.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And Dunn and I are going to talk about this some next week as we look at Deborah's story and Barak and how the people had a tough time trusting in God. But if you look at the Israelites throughout history, even in the book of Judges, we see a lot of that. If you go to Judges chapter 10 and chapter 11 and you look at Jephthah, so he was the son of a prostitute, and so he grew up into this mighty warrior, but the inhabitants, basically the other Jews, they threw him out. They said, we don't want you, leave, because you're detestable to us. And as he left and was a migrant of his own, and then eventually when the Amorites came to try and overtake them, they came back and said, Jephthah, we need your help. We need you to lead us. We need you to lead our military. And he goes, I'll do it, but you're going to have to put me in charge after this battle's over. And they said, okay, we will. Just come and save us. And he goes, okay. And God told him, I'm going to give this into your hands. I'm going to give the Amorites into your hands. But Jephthah, he trusted God, but not enough. He still doubted. And so we see in Judges 11 where Jephthah makes a promise to God. He says, Lord, if you will deliver the Amorites into my hand, the first thing that greets me out of my home, I will offer as a burnt sacrifice before you. And he goes, that ought to do it. Like, if God had it before, he's got to have it now. That ought to get this battle to where it needs to be. That ought to cinch the deal if I make God this promise. Did Jephthah have to make that promise? No. God was still going to give the battle into his hand. And for those of you who don't know where this story goes, well, this true account, when Jephthah defeated the Amorites and he was coming back home, his daughter danced out of the house and welcomed him home. And he tore his clothes and he cried to God. And his daughter, much like how Abraham's son was willing, said, Dad, I'll give my life up. Just give me 2 months to go and mourn my virginity in the mountains with my friends. To mourn and lament never being able to have a family or to know a husband. Let me have this, but I'll honor your agreement with God. How about us? Do we trust God? I mean, really. I think oftentimes we try to fix everything on our own. We try to do it on our own first, and then maybe we'll go back to God if we remember, or if it didn't work out. But do we have the level that Moses trusted God? Or are we just like the Israelites in the Exodus? I got to break attention. But we were joking about how you were saying, if you were Moses, you're like, hey, Aaron, I'm not going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm going to ease out tonight. Yeah. You're going to have this. I've had enough of this and these people here.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a donkey and get out of here.
Yeah, I'll be gone. Come morning, I'm gone.
Yeah, I know my way.
Yeah. I can find my way through the desert.
I don't think I have the faith he does. I think in most applications, in most instances, I can relate a lot more with the Israelites than I can with Moses. And that terrifies me. You know, Johnny, you had shared this point about a story with your father, but I asked, is there a personal point in your life where you maybe trusted in yourself and not God and recognized that there was a mistake that had been made? Do you remember that?
Well, we were talking about prayer. That was basically our discussion there, and that, you know, throughout the books here with Moses and the Israelites, quite a few times when they would do something, you read that Moses immediately fell on his face. Sometimes him and Aaron, but a lot of times Moses fell on his face and prayed to God. And that's what we talked about, that a lot of times that's not my first reaction, is to go to God in prayer. I may talk to Marisha, I may pick up the phone and call, Brett or Greg or William or somebody and have a discussion with them. And then later I'll think, well, maybe I should pray about this, which that should be my first reaction. And honestly, that should be any of us' first reaction, but too many times it's a delayed reaction.
Yeah.
That was my point on that.
Yeah, a lot of the time we'll miss that. I want to talk about Korah before we get too far ahead. So if y'all will turn to Numbers chapter 16, I guess I'll open it up. Nobody's made a comment, but if there's anything you said, I knew you had something.
I want to go back to the incident with 12 spots, right? So you have the
12, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said 10. Thank you. Y'all correct me. I can be wrong. It's okay.
But it's I'll think about this. So, just human nature is, congregation is usually going to follow the small handful. So, in the end, we're going to be in a position where we're going to get our
turns into, instead of looking at the elders as my shepherd, it turns into, well, they said, in the same way that we do with the military or in the business, it turns into us and them, or us and they. And before you realize it, you detach yourself from everything that the church is, which is family. We're brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and children and grandparents. That's a great point, Jake. Devastated.
What is the
I think you're exactly right. People do that today. God, why would you allow me to go through this suffering? Why would you allow this thing to happen to me? And you're like, I trusted you. And the reason why we place so much trust is, for most folks, is because we feel safe. We feel comfortable. We feel like we can share this with this person and they're not going to hurt us by doing that. And sometimes we can have misguided trust. Sometimes we can misinterpret the thing in which we're trusting, which would more so be the case of the Israelites. And I think that goes into more so of, when we talk about Korah's rebellion, we'll talk about what they did the following day. And the instance of the following day, I think, falls very much so into what you were just saying. So if you'll turn to Numbers chapter 16 with us, and then we'll look at, well, that's right after. Here we go. We'll look at verse 31. And so we have this 250 men who come up, and it's not just them as these leaders, but they also say, are we not God's people? Are we not living out what God has told us to do? Why should we listen to you? And they were very angry by all of this. And Korah was leading them. And so they basically have this show off where God says, come out here, Moses, the 250 men, and then Moses. And if we look at verse 31, and as soon as he had finished speaking, Moses that is, all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and all the people who belonged to Korah, and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, which I would too, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up. That's exactly what I would. And at the same time, it says, and fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men that were offering the incense. So this happens. Korah's household, his rebellion, all get taken up. Johnny, is there something you want to add to that before we...
Well, what is one of the most amazing things to me, if you go down from that right there, okay, God opened up the earth, as far as we know, first time that a recorded earthquake, but anyway, God opened up the earth, swallowed all them. 250 men, he sends fire from heaven, kills all them. Go down to verse 41. On the next day, the very next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. And I'm thinking, their bodies hadn't even quit smoking, and y'all are complaining. I'm amazed. That's just fascinating to me to think that they had that kind of mindset. And what you were talking about, they had just witnessed in Egypt, the power, I mean, Egypt at that time was the most powerful nation, armies known to man.
On the earth.
And then God had completely brought them to their knees and made sure that they understood he was God. And the Israelites witnessed this. And for them to get to the promised land that God promised them, and then see some giants and say, we can't do this. We can't take this land. That just is fascinating to me to think that. And I don't know that we wouldn't be the same way. I hope not. But it's fascinating to me to think that developed that way.
Right. And that blows my mind. And one thing I wanted to mention to you guys, if you like taking notes in your Bible to parallel things, when it talks about Korah and his household, or just Korah and his followers, if you'll put in Numbers 26 verse 11, it says, but the sons of Korah did not die. Well, why? Because they didn't side with their father. You guys ever meet somebody and you're like, he could not be more different from his dad. She could not be more different from her mother. Well, apparently his sons did not agree with what he was doing. And so we see Aser, Elkanah, and then Abiasaph. And so their descendants ended up being temple gatekeepers. If you look at, there's 11 different psalms that are written by the sons of Korah. That Korah. The descendants of that Korah wrote those 11 psalms. One of the things that will blow your mind, the second son, Elkanah, one of his descendants is the prophet Samuel. That was like Hannah. Hannah's son Samuel that sat under Levi and was the one who appointed David. That Samuel was a descendant of the second son of Korah. And you don't take my word for it. Reference 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 23 through 24, and then 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 27. If you want to talk more about that, we can talk about that later, but that's just something that blew my mind to see the correlation. And just because your father may not be the guy in front of God's side doesn't mean that you and your descendants can't. You can change that family history. You have that decision to help rewrite that. And as we move into our closing thing, some of y'all may not know about Jethro. Jethro is an incredible flute player from like the 1970s. There was in a rock band, Jethro Tull. Anyway, no, Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. He's a priest of Midian, and from what we know, he's a shepherd. That's what he did. That's what his daughters did. That's what Moses learned while he was under. During the Exodus, Jethro, near the beginning part of it, is able to link up with Moses. He's able to see them. He's able to have a conversation with Moses. And he's able to see how Moses is leading the people. But what he ends up doing is giving Moses some criticism. He gives him some advice. I don't know, Johnny, what's your take on that?
Well, this to me tells you a lot about Moses and Moses' character, because Moses could have let pride enter into his life. I mean, he could have looked at Jethro and said, Jethro, I mean, y'all don't have Wi-Fi out there anymore. I mean, you haven't been keeping up with things that's going on. I'm Moses. Ain't nobody in Egypt that don't know my name. Check GQ. I got covered last month. I've got people lining up for podcasts. They're going to make a movie about me. You're talking to Moses. But instead, I mean, he could have been prideful. But instead, if you look in chapter 18, Exodus chapter 18, verse 7, chapter 18, verse 8. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And so he gave full credit to God. He didn't. There was no indication of any pride on his part. And all that he had been through, dealt with, done through God with him, but yet he wouldn't. That was just very impressive to me.
I thought about it too. If Moses would have let pride in, again, I think we would be reading an entirely different book.
Absolutely.
He let his anger burn hot.
He did do that.
Meekness isn't the same as anger. I'm actually going to pull this up so I don't butcher it. But in the notes that I have prepared for this, I talked about, interestingly enough, if you look at the Greek word for meekness, it's praiotes. And if my pronunciation is wrong, it's because I dropped out after the first month of Greek. But if you look at the New Testament, that word is also used to describe as a war horse, something that's powerful, yet under control. Moses was powerful. Moses was strong. Being meek means you can be strong, that it's bridled, you're composed, you have that strength under composure. And as Moses carried that, there's very few times, one of the only times I can really think of, 2 times, that Moses let his power get out of his control was one when he murdered the man, but also later whenever he struck the rock twice and he rebuked the people and he was just mad as all get out. I probably would have messed up a lot sooner than what he did. But Moses was able to keep that. And so even though he wrote it himself, Numbers 12:3, Moses is described as very meek more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. And I think it really is an incredible way to really end our discussion. God knows our hearts. Moses pleaded with God, and God listened. He listened to what his servant Moses had to say. So God knows us whenever we plead, especially when we plead and with complete trust. Our needs and our wants aren't always going to be aligned. Jesus says, he prays, give us today our daily bread. That's not Krispy Kreme. That's not Daddy Does Donuts. That is bread. The most basic, and if you're gluten intolerant, terrifying thing in the world. But it's the most basic thing that we could have for sustenance, and that's what Jesus reminds us to pray for. A lot of our homes, we live in tiny mansions. I was thinking about it, but if I look back, I'm like thousands of years ago, like back to the time of the Egyptians, I look at the dishwasher, I look at the washing machine, I look at different things like outside, I'm like, that probably would have been a slave, that would have been a hired servant, this would have been a hired servant, this would have been my wife working half the day. But we have all of these things. Like, we are an extremely blessed people, and God has blessed us immensely with that. It's like Rob had said in the youth group, he said, having an attitude of gratitude is kind of a cliche thing to say. But with that, he says, what if you lost your eyesight? How much would you pay to immediately have your eyesight restored just like that? And I'm like, everything. Take everything. And he goes, yet God allows us to have our eyesight and all of our other senses every single day that we get to rely on and that we get to use. And when we focus on the things like that, sometimes like what you said, if you were complaining, like being one of the Israelites, you just wish that somebody would just slap you on the side of the head and be like, come on, man, there's men outside. Like, just eat bread.
That's just it was given to them.
Yeah.
They didn't have any. You think about from the time they left Egypt. Of course, then they crossed through the Red Sea. They didn't have anything to worry about. God fed them, made sure they had water, made sure they had clothes, taking them to the Promised Land.
Feet didn't swell.
They're not under Egyptian bondage anymore. They're not getting beat. They're not having to make bricks, gather their own straw to make bricks. They're not having to do anything.
Making enough bricks.
Yeah. And, all they had to do was get from there to the Promised Land and trust God to enter the Promised Land. But it didn't work out that way. They didn't.
Right.
You're exactly right. I think, oh, yeah. The heated seats, my truck didn't work. I can't believe it. Mm. Mhm. Mm. Mm. Mhm. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for saying that. I don't even want to reiterate what you said because it would detract from how great it was. But I think that's exactly it. And if we have that kind of faith and we remember that, like what you just said, and we carry that into our workplace, people are going to notice. You know, you might, when you carry a light into a dark room, it makes a huge difference. Like, I'm not going to ask you guys to do anything I haven't done. And this isn't gloating about me. I'm not boasting in myself. I'm boasting in Jesus. I'm boasting in God. If anybody thinks I'm not, please talk to me, 'cause I mean this from the bottom of my heart. But being around the soldiers I've had in the Army, I try to keep the most positive attitude I can, because I know a lot of those guys aren't reading their Bible. I know they're not paying attention to things like that, but they see me, and I might be one of the only Christians they know. And from years ago, I have a former specialist who made sergeant, but he got out of the Army, and he texted me because he's like, he hasn't obeyed the gospel, but he's like, I have a friend who needs to know about Jesus, and I know you love Jesus. Can you help find him a church? And I'm like, Piedmont Road, Church of Christ, you know, because he lived in Marietta. So I was like, go there. But it's, you never know the example or the instance or what kind of thing you're going to impact on somebody's life, and it's by having faith like that. No matter how terrible the circumstance is, I think the Army exacerbates that because it's so not fun. You guys hear me complain, but when I get there, I'm turning that off. I'm not going to complain when I'm around them, but it exacerbates that to a certain degree, I think, because you're physically just not enjoying it. But when people see that joy that you have, especially if everything else in your life is going terrible, somebody's passed away, something dear to you has been lost, whatever's going on, and they still see that love you have for God, and they see you carry that with you every day at work, that could say more than a Bible study ever could. That might be your only ticket to ever having a Bible study with somebody, is by living your life for Christ in that way and building up your faith in the Word. Like, that's, like, thank you.
What you said. We have a tendency. Am I complaining about a blessing God's given me? I mean, okay, my truck's not running today. My battery's not going to work.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm pretty upset about it. Well, there's a whole lot of people that would love to have a vehicle, get them to work. To walk, ride a bicycle. But a lot of times when we're complaining about something God has blessed us. Just stop and back up and look at it. A lot of times I had to protect myself.
Haven't we all? Well, we've hit our time limit. Do you mind praying us out?